I have the privilege of having Dr. Mike Frazier. He's the author of Strong Men, Strong Marriages. This is the book. I have it for those watching the video. I have it here in my hand. And let me share a little bit about who our guest is and what's he all about. Now, I've had the privilege of having him present to our men's group, to the Brotherhood. So we got to not only hear a presentation from him, but then go one-to-one and ask. So guys got to ask specific questions. Obviously, a video like that, we're not going to make public because it goes real deep. But we're going to touch on some points that I think will be of a lot of interest to men here today. And then obviously you can contact the doctor on your own later and see if there's a connection there. So Mike Frazier, he's a doctor. He's a psychiatrist and a marriage coach, and he helps high-achieving Christian men have more intimate marriages. He's a father of 5, and he's been married since 2005. Dr. Frazier, welcome.
Thank you. Really glad to be here.
Yeah, so you help men have more intimate marriages. If you're only working with the man, how do you convince the wife to want to have more intimacy? Because I don't think there's hardly any husbands out there who are would say they have more than enough. It's usually they want
Sure.
more. So
Yeah.
how, if you're only working with the man, how do you get his wife convinced?
Yeah. It's a great question. And so, would it be ideal or better if both people were working together? Yeah. And does that sometimes happen, right? I'll start working with the guy and then the wife is interested in coming in later. That happens too. That said, I think it's a mistake a lot of guys will make is like, well, I guess I can't do anything. Like my wife doesn't want it. I guess I'm stuck, right? And then they are stuck because they don't think there's anything they can do. So what we look at really is what's kind of the root cause of that disconnection. So we talk about there's really 3 pillars that make a marriage work: trust, communication, and intimacy. So usually what happens, and so like I work with a few different situations, but let's just say like the guy feels like, well, my marriage is pretty good, except the sex just isn't there, right? Like it's not where I want it. We're good roommates, but it doesn't feel like much more than that. Um, Usually what's happened there is there's been different kind of breaks in trust over time where a lot of it's the guy not managing his emotions particularly well. So like his wife will not be up for sex one night, for example, and he goes and pouts and storms off and watches porn and just kind of like does that sort of thing. And so what he shows his wife is that he can't really manage his emotions very well, and that's not very attractive to her. Um, and then a lot of times that turns into some resentment. So then communication starts to kind of fall apart. She doesn't really feel comfortable sharing with him because he doesn't seem to have a good handle on himself. And so then, yeah, she's not very interested in having sex with him because he isn't particularly strong or attractive. So what we look at is, okay, like let's really work on you managing your thoughts and emotions better. Let's work on you being able to communicate better with your wife. Because yeah, I mean, I call it strong men, strong marriages. Really, women are attracted to strength. And a lot of times what's happened is in one way or another, you've shown weakness across either spiritual, mental, emotional, sexual, or some combination of all of those.
So the man wants sex from his wife. She turns him down. He pouts in the case of a man who does that. Um, and is any of this possibly a test? Are women testing us?
So it's a good question. I think there's some truth to that, whether that's conscious or not. Um, I think women want to know, yeah, like, is this a strong man, right? Is this a man who can, you know, handle his own thoughts, emotions? Is he a man of his word? Is he going to treat me well even when it's difficult? So yeah, whether it's conscious or not, I think there's truth to that.
Does work, and this may be simplifying it, but I'm a simple guy.
Yeah.
Does working out, does physically getting strong, maybe it makes the woman more attracted to a guy, obviously. A guy with
hmm
a six pack is a lot better than a guy with a beer belly for a woman, I would guess, with some exceptions maybe. But would working out, just the act of it, go, hey, I'm going to be in the garage working out, lifting weights. Does that form an opinion for women that makes them want to be more intimate?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And so I work with I say high achieving guys. A lot of them are in good shape, right? Like, and even in my own case, like I exercise regularly, like I was in good shape, but still my wife wasn't attracted to me. And so it's not just that. And I did a survey of 500 wives at one point, kind of asking, okay, like, what are you attracted to? Like, fit, like having a six pack or that kind of thing was actually really low, like
Mm,
on what was attractive to them. As far as physical stuff went, it was more like good grooming, good hygiene, smell good, dress well, more than being like really jacked or cut or whatever. Um, now, that said, like you developing physical strength for yourself does build confidence. It does show like, okay, this is a guy who can commit to something and do it. So it shows you have integrity. Um, just for yourself, you're going to get a lot of benefit in terms of your mental health and your emotional health and your physical health by working out regularly. And so that will, you know, make you feel better and therefore be more attractive. So I definitely, like as part of my program, one of the things we have people do is make sure you're doing some kind of exercise every day, whatever that is, just because of all its benefits for spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical health. Um, but yeah, like I used to think that way too. Like, well, like I just make yourself more physically attractive, right? Like that should do it. Because as guys, we are kind of wired more that way. We're more attracted to the physical attractiveness. So we kind of think, okay, well, it should be the same for me, right? Um, but it's part of it, but yeah, it's actually more the spiritual, mental, emotional, physical is part of it, and sexual strength that nowadays women are more attracted to.
yeah, and there's definitely something wired in women that you see it all the time. I mean, it's fair to say that some women want financial security
Hmm.
over looks. You see
Yep.
a 60-year-old guy with a
Yep.
40-year-old woman, and she's very good looking, and he's not the greatest looking, and but you could
Yes.
tell he could provide, and so those are some of probably, I'm sure, many differences. What differences do men need to understand? Because that's the majority of our listeners. Do they need to understand about women?
Yeah. In terms of just attractiveness, you mean, or just
No,
in
just
terms of,
how are men and women different? You know,
yeah.
nowadays, I think you and I don't subscribe to this, but you and I are able to say the difference between a man and a woman. But
Yeah.
you're at another level. You're a doctor who works on these things. How are men and women different? Specifically talking to men, so we can understand better.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think probably the one of the more important frameworks to think about is this like this idea of trust, communication, and intimacy. So if you're a guy who's like, man, I want a better relationship with my wife, like I want more intimacy, I want sex more often. When I talk to guys too, like they do want to have that closer emotional connection too. You know, they want a best friend, they want someone that's there and supporting them, and encouraging and all of that. So if you if you can understand, okay, like being a financial provider, important for sure. You know, being in good physical health, important, right? Although both of those are maybe not quite as important as we think they are. At least in my mind, I was like, okay, hey, look, if I can provide well for my family financially, if I'm in good shape, if I'm a good father, like I'm done. Like that should be enough for my wife to be extremely attracted to me, to think I'm amazing. Um, but just that wasn't it, right? Like that wasn't it. It was building up these strengths. So um, the mindset that I got into was okay, like I'm doing these things, and so she kind of owes to me to appreciate me, to have sex with me, because like I'm checking all my boxes, so she should therefore give me attention, appreciation, affection, and sex for everything I'm doing. Um, And it was that mindset that created problems because it was kind of like you owe it to me. As a Christian guy too, is kind of like, well, I kept myself sexually pure before marriage and like I'm not cheating on you. So you kind of owe it to me there too, because like you're the only person I can have sex with morally. So like you should do it. And uh, we talked about this on our group call, but even like wanting that isn't so much the problem. It's just not being direct about it and kind of thinking like, well, you owe it to me, and so you should just do that. So women, and you talked about what's the difference between men and women. Women are very attuned to your intentions behind things, maybe more than guys are. So like if you go and you wash the dishes, for example, you can do that for a couple reasons. You can either do that because you really care about your wife, you just want to make your day easier, or you can do it because, okay, like this is kind of a trade-off here. If I do dishes, then she should have sex with me. And so the action is the same, washing the dishes. The intention is different. And so the one intention of like, hey, you had a hard day, let me help you out. Let me, make sure you're having a great day. Paradoxically, it's a lot more likely to get you to get her to want to have sex with you versus like, well, I'm doing this because I want sex. She'll pick that up and then be not attracted to it. Um, so like, you asked about differences between men and women. I think that's one of the big ones is just like they're very attuned to intentions, maybe more than we are for what people are doing, and especially what their husband's doing. And talking with women too, they're very sensitive to feeling like they're being used for sex. Um, so that they're on like high alert for that. Like, is this because he likes me, or is it just because he wants sex? Is it just because he wants physical release, or does he actually want to be intimate with me, meaning like know me and love me and have sex be part of that, versus like, yeah, I'm just horny and I want a physical release right now. They can pick that up like really well. And so, especially too, if your wife's been through any kind of sexual abuse, which unfortunately that's the case with my wife, um, they're ultra attuned to that, right? Because they've been used for sex. And so they're very alert and scared of being used that way. And so it's on us as the man to really be careful and know our own heart and know our own intentions. And it's kind of hard. Like, and it takes some learning to, even for me, it was hard to understand the idea of like wanting to have sex versus wanting to have sex with my wife, right? It's kind of like, well, they're the same, but really they're not, because in the one case, it's just like, well, just whoever's around and my wife's here, so now I'm having sex, versus like, no, like this is a woman I love and cherish, and I want this to be something special that we share together. Like that she's attracted to, right? And that's something special versus the other one, um, not so much.
I got to ask you because this is a good opportunity. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Tell me if I did it wrong. In my
Hmm.
31-day book, it's 31 days of challenges for men only. And there's a physical component every single day to keep guys active doing things they don't want to do every day. But there's
Hmm.
also something else you got to do. And one of those days is you have to have a sex talk with your wife. And in that, I ask the guys to practice it on their own, to leave emotions out of it, leave the past out of it, and just share in a calm, happy state. This is kind of what I feel like I need, and I just want to share that with you and get it
Yep.
out there. Is that
Yep.
advisable?
For sure. Yeah, like there's no problem with like explaining what you want sexually, right? Like my wife and I just had a discussion about this the other day. Like it's important to um express where you're at, what you want sexually, what you like sexually. Um, and then be open to her feedback, right, and trying to get to something that works for both of you. Like in our case, that's the example I know the best is my own marriage, right? So yeah, would I like to have sex every day? Yeah, that'd be great, right? For her, it's going to be kind of up and down. Like that trauma was very severe that she went through, so there's going to be times where yeah, sex is great. There's going to be times where like the memories are hard and like there's anniversary dates and stuff like that where it's just not going to be a connecting experience. Like it just won't, it's just going to remind her of hard stuff. And so I'm not going to come in and force that, right? Like that would hurt our marriage. So we have to find the things that will work for that. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, just in general, there's going to be differences in sex drives between men and women, even if there's not trauma, right? And so typically men want sex more often than women, right? So there's just going to be a little bit of a balance and figuring out what works for your marriage there.
Do you think that culturally, if you look at some places, maybe Latin America, these are the ones that come to my mind, Latin America, Eastern Europe, a little bit more traditional, where the women have come to or have been forever more accepting that, yeah, we're all different, and the man, this is his top need, and maybe they're more likely than typical, maybe Western European, Canadian American, Australian. I don't know. I'm just guessing
No,
here.
I think there's truth to that. I think, depending on where you grow up and, um, you know, and look, like there's nothing really even that wrong with that. If the wife's just kind of like, hey, like this is something important to my husband, like I'm wanting to give that to him. Maybe it's not as important to her. Maybe doesn't she doesn't love it as much as you do, but she's good with it, and this is like a gift that she wants to give you. That's awesome, right? That's great. And I think ideally, that's how you want a marriage to be, right? Like in our marriage, and I think most marriages are like this, like what's important to my wife isn't necessarily inherently super important to me. So, for example, um, like I have this cup, right? And I put protein shakes in it. And like for a long time, my wife was asking me, like it leaves this crust around the rim, right? And for a long time, she was asking me, hey, like, can you just wipe that out? Like it's kind of gross. Um, to me, I don't care, right? I don't care at all. Like I can leave that crust. It's going to get washed later. Like who cares? But it's important to her, right? And so so I can see that a couple of ways. I can see that either as like, oh, my wife's such a nag and like she just needs to deal with it. Or I can see, okay, I'll do it, but I really hate doing this and kind of feel like you're being like you're whipped, right? You're just going to do what your wife wants. That's another way to look at it. But a way to look at it that's going to be much more valuable for you in your marriage and much more useful. There's like a recent shift for me, even, is just to say, hey, like, yeah, maybe that's not that important to me, but it's important to her. So I'm just going to make it important to me because she's important. Right. And even expressing that to her, hey, look, like, I don't really care about this, but you are important to me. And so I can take 2 minutes or 30 seconds or whatever
Yeah.
to do that just to show that you're important to me. Now, like, this is what's cool, right? A lot of guys, they feel like it's not even, it is sex, but part of it's just like missing that look of love from your wife, right? Where she just looks at you and just know, like, she just adores you, right? And she just like wants to be with you. Um, like for me personally, as I've started making more of those shifts and just telling her, yeah, like maybe this is important to me, but you're important to me, right? So I'm gonna do that because I love you, right? Man, like that's transformed our marriage in big ways, just like seeing that look of love more and her feeling valued and important. And that's led to more sexual intimacy too, right? Because she feels important, she feels valued. And so again, like as far as differences between men and women, I think men underestimate how important those small things are to women. Um, and right or wrong, women sort of attach these little things to, does my husband actually care? Right? Because in our minds, like that cup's like, well, like who cares? Right? Like I'm providing for you, I'm taking care of the kids, like I'm doing all the big stuff. So like, who cares about this little stuff? It's like, and what's happening there is you're discounting what she actually thinks and feels. You're invalidating it. So a good book about this is like How Your Marriage Ends. I just read that one recently, but he was a divorced guy, and this was kind of his big point was like those kind of discussions over and over, like, and I realized I was doing this in my own marriage, like just saying, okay, yeah, like that if I say over and over, oh, the cup doesn't matter, the cup doesn't matter, she just here, like in the moment, it's not that big a deal, but it's kind of like a little paper cut.
Mm.
And eventually those add up to your wife translating in her mind, like, I'm not important to my husband. So why am I going to open my heart and my body to him? Right? I'm not
Wow.
going to. And so
Yeah.
then that's what creates this distance over time.
What's your theory on the why we're built this way? Why are men the horny ones, and why are women typically, there's always exceptions, but typically,
Yeah. Yeah.
and why are women, they're the gatekeepers of
Hmm.
society. They get to decide who procreates and who doesn't. In
Yeah.
the olden days, I think it was probably pretty simple. The guy who could hunt and provide and defend procreated.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you have welfare and government assistance. So anybody could provide. They've made it easy for the least
Yeah.
talented, the least tough guy could provide in that way. But why are we different? What's your theory?
Yeah. I think that, that's a great question. I think the way I think about it is just from the evolutionary perspective, right? Of saying, okay, you know, for a man, you know, it's like even if we take morality or whatever out of it, like a guy could have sex with lots of women, right? Have lots of kids,
All the way
and
till he's 100 years old.
right, right. And there's kind of like I think if we're all honest with ourselves, there's like a desire to do that to some extent, right?
Sure.
And so, like monogamy is tough in a way for guys, right? Um, Personally, I believe that's the right thing, and there's like a divine design for us to grow as we do that. Um, but yeah, it's like for a guy, it's like okay, yeah, just have as many kids as you can and want with as many women as you want from just like a biological perspective. Where the woman, kind of going back to hunter-gatherer days, right? Like this is her body, she's going to be carrying this kid for 9 months. She's probably going to be the one holding on to this kid for 9 months and doing most of the caretaking. So she wants to be careful with that. There's just a much um
Investment.
higher exactly. Yeah, a much higher investment sexually for her. Because like whether the woman gets pregnant or not to us, just from a pure biological standpoint, it doesn't even matter really. But to the woman, it matters a lot, right? And especially if this is, and today this is relevant too, right? Because if, so another thing, like how are men and women different? Women are also very sensitive to how you treat your children, right? And
Mm.
so if where if your wife's kind of like yelling at your kids, maybe you're kind of like, maybe you shouldn't do that, but you'll still have sex with her that night, right? Like it won't really impact your sexual attraction to her. Whereas a woman, you yell at your kids, you can almost guarantee she will not be interested in you that night. Um, or maybe for a while, right? You're gonna have to apologize and make things right there. Why? Right? Because yeah, I think women are just more biologically caretakers, right? They want to make sure their kids are okay. And so if you're viewed as sort of like a threat to the kids, and where guys will mistake this too, I think again, like where men and women different, men will come at this and think, I'm not beating my kids, so I'm a good dad, right? Yeah, I yell at my kids sometimes, or I hold them to a higher standard or whatever. Um, but if I yell at them, who cares? It's not that big a deal. Where a lot of wives will see that as scary, as threatening. And like if we're honest with ourselves, it is scary to the kids too, if we lose our temper and do that. Um, so yeah, like uh, I feel like I'm kind of losing track here a little bit, but
No, it's
but
fine because it's all good stuff. But
yeah,
so yeah, women are more scared typically. And I learned this over the years. When you get in a car with a woman, and a bunch of guys, sometimes this doesn't even come up, but a woman might say, and is in my experience, do we have enough gas in the car? And the
yeah,
reason is because and then I put myself in their feet, in their place, in their shoes. Well, wait a minute. If I was smaller, if I was less strong, if
yeah,
I had beautiful hair that men are going to look at, I would be scared that guys are going to come at me. So I don't want to
yeah,
run out of gas. I want to protect myself at all times. I want to be safe. So I could see that they see the yelling as scary. Interestingly
yeah,
enough, my wife could kill one of our four kids. I'll be really upset and she'll go to jail. But before she goes off, I'd like to have sex one more
yeah.
time. And guys, yeah, we're so different. How about this? The horniest of men in, let's call it, the last few thousand years had more sex. So, and this is maybe in, non-marriage, they had it with this one, or they had multiple wives, or,
Mhm.
whatever. So they spread their seed and they spread their DNA. And the guy who was not very horny maybe never had a kid.
Yep,
And those type of DNAs have, even in a short matter of time, there's evolution there
yep.
where, right? So, my, I could share this, I think, as he's passed away, but my grandfather was a police officer in Havana in the 1940s. And once I became an adult, he used to tell me stories about all his conquests of women.
Mm.
And I asked him, how did you manage to conquer so many women? Very Latin
Yeah,
approach. And he says, well, I'd walk the streets all day. We didn't even have a police car. He wasn't assigned to one, and this is in the 40s. I'd walk the street all day in my uniform. And he was very talkative and a funny guy. And he connected with so many women. And then I think, well, that explains a lot. For the guy, he's the result of people before him. I'm the result of him, as
yeah.
my grandfather. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's truth to that. Yeah, like kind of the genetic pool skews for a higher sex drive. Um, yeah, I think there's truth to that for sure.
Just
Uh,
unfortunately, we haven't tapped into having women have that affect them.
that'd be nice, right? Have a better match there. Um, but yeah, I think yeah, kind of coming back to the idea how are men and women different, that idea of protecting the young, right? Like if you want your wife to be more attracted to you, um, like do a really good job being kind to the kids, right? You need to correct them. Like as a dad, you need to correct them, but doing it in a way that is like the word discipline actually means like teaching, making disciples, followers, right? And so when you're coming at your kid and they need to make an adjustment, they need to do their chores or whatever, right? Like instead of like, you can do this right now. And um, just come out and be like, hey, like let me explain to you why this is important. Let me explain to you the consequence if this doesn't happen. And then you follow through on the consequence, right? Like the to me, good parenting, and I'm definitely not perfect at this, but good parenting is instead of having your emotions be the consequence, like just having the consequence be the consequence. So like if the kids
Yep.
don't pick up their toys, you throw them away, for example,
Yep.
instead of you don't pick up your toys, I scream at you, and now you damage the relationship, and you freak your wife out, and now she's not as interested in having sex with you, right? Now it's just the lesson of, hey, take care of your stuff, you lose it.
Yeah.
And now they learn that lesson instead of, oh, if I do something wrong, dad's gonna go crazy, which isn't a great lesson.
Yeah. My wife is the best at that. And I learned it from her because my instinct is to get upset.
Yeah,
We've been married over 22 years. Our oldest is 19, so we've been at it for a while. But she taught me, and man, does it work, is to say to the kids, if you don't do this thing, and we have a rule, so we don't always have to talk about it, then the consequence is this.
yeah,
And when we give it to them, because we're very good at sticking to it, it's with zero emotion. We just go, oh, that?
yep,
No, no, we're not doing that. And you just
right,
walk away
yep,
and leave it there. We're not going to
yep,
argue. Remember, that's the rule. Maybe the first time they'll put up a little bit of argument, but after a couple times they go, oh, yeah, if I
yeah,
don't wash the dishes, I don't get the $20. We had, like, for
right,
example, with my daughter, that's our deal. She chose that chore. You wash the dishes 7 days a week, you get $20 on Sunday. She started doing that when she was 10 years old. That's $1,000 a year.
yeah,
She values that tremendously. And for us, it's a huge help. $20,
right,
and I never have to do
yeah,
dishes.
it's easy,
However,
yep,
if she makes a choice to go spend the night at a friend's house, she misses out on that day. She gets paid zero. So the first time or two, she's like, "Oh, but I did it 6 days." Our deal is you do it every day and let us never worry about it, and you get $1,000 a year. So yeah, after a couple times, she accepted it. But man, I would have made that mistake, and I'm assuming I'm not the only guy who would think I'm going to yell in their face and then they'll learn, right?
right, exactly, exactly. Because a lot of us saw that, that's how we got raised, and so we don't know necessarily a different way. And the thing is, it does sort of work, right? Like you kind of freak them out and you scare them into doing it, but there's unintended consequences, right? Where your kid kind of learns that dad's not particularly safe, maybe doesn't open up as much, wife's kind of freaked out, maybe she's not as attracted to you. So those are like the consequences that maybe you don't necessarily see. But like I'm living that now. So we have an 18-year-old too, and we're not particularly close, right? Why? Because I acted that way for a long time. I'm better now, but like the damage was kind of done and we're trying to repair now. But like, so just like a cautionary tale for maybe some younger dads out there, like
Man,
this really is the way to do it.
that's awesome that you're sharing that and that vulnerable of a share. That makes it so real for guys who can relate. So many guys can relate. Why don't they teach the things that you're teaching men? Imagine if you could have access to these men at 18, at
Yeah,
25 years old, when they're going to get married. Wouldn't this make all of our lives much easier?
yes, absolutely. It definitely would. Um, and yeah, I mean that's kind of what I'm hoping to create with the like I have a program that we run that really kind of runs through all this stuff in a pretty simple way. Like it's a 90-day deal and you practice stuff every day to learn these skills. Um, but yeah, like it's a tough you have to be a little careful with this idea, like, oh, I wish I would have known this sooner, right? Because the truth is, it's always going to be like that. Like a year from now, I'm going to look back and say, oh man, like I wish I would have known this a year ago or this a year ago. Um, but to your point, like I think trying to share the wisdom we've gained with younger people, it's our responsibility, right? And we want to try to make the next generation better than this one.
Yeah, I wish we could somehow, well, in the future they'll just program this in the chip and we'll
That'd be
have
nice.
we'll, we'll have these senses much better. Um, you went to medical school, right?
Correct. Yep.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to UCLA Medical School.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Why psychiatry and why this, what you're doing today?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So, at a young age, I was like 16, I kind of thought I'd want to go into counseling or psychiatry. And I don't know exactly what drove that. I think part of it was um, uh, my, yeah, I kind of just was drawn to that sort of like support role or like kind of peacemaker role. My family was like, I kind of stepped into that role a little bit in my family. Um, So yeah, around that age, I kind of thought, yeah, like I think this would be a good thing. I talked to a psychiatrist, but one of my buddy's dads was a psychiatrist, and he kind of explained to me what he did, and I was like, yeah, like that sounds good. Um, so I went into medical school, kind of thinking I would do that. When I went to medical school, uh, like you get exposed to everything, right? So like I really liked orthopedic surgery, like I like sports, so that was cool. I liked physical medicine, rehabilitation, kind of same idea. It was sports related, your body. I've always been interested in that. Optimizing for exercise and sports and that kind of thing. But then I went on my psychiatry rotation. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, like I enjoy this. And I think to me, what psychiatry offers is the chance to help someone improve their entire life, right? Like if your brain's working right, um, you're gonna have better relationships. You're gonna be able to exercise better. Like if you're depressed, your brain's not working right, and if we can get you to where you're not, and you can be functioning well, or like that impacts everything. So that's what I like about it. That's why I chose it. Um, why I'm now doing more marriage stuff is really from my own marriage. Like we had tons of issues and I was trying to figure it out. And yeah, really, it's just a progression of trying to share the lessons that I've learned that are hopefully helpful to guys in similar situations.
How's your wife feel about the fact that you do this? Simply, the part I want to ask about is that you have to share your examples.
Yeah.
What does she say
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a great question. Early on in like the podcast and stuff, she didn't like listening to it because, and the truth is this too. Like I've evolved over the past few years that I've been doing this, where at first it wasn't exactly this, but it kind of was like still trying to make myself look good and trying to make myself look like, oh, like look at everything I'm dealing with. My wife's this broken victim, right? And I'm the hero. And like I wasn't really consciously trying to do that, but I think subconsciously I was, right? And so it did kind of sound like and sort of was sort of throwing her under the bus in some of these stories. It wasn't, and I wasn't out there saying like, "Oh, my wife's the worst," and look at what a hero I am. But it was sort of like that. And then over time, I kind of started to see, oh, like, man, that's not right. Like, I don't need to be doing that. Like, I need to be protecting my wife in every way and like making her, building her up and like showing she's important. And so, yeah, if you listen, like, there's like 300 podcasts. If you listen to the first bunch and then later, like, you'll notice the shift, but and don't listen to all 300 unless you really want to. Like, that's a lot. But yeah. So, coming back to your question, like, how does she feel about it? Um, yeah, and like I had to read through some of the book and like, hey, like, are you okay sharing this? Like, what do you want me to change? And so I try to be careful with that too, of like making sure she's okay with whatever goes
Yeah,
out.
it's not just about you, it's about both of
Exactly.
you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, fortunately, she's cool about the, you know, sharing this stuff.
Yeah. And good, you've worked that out in a way that works, and that's important
Yeah.
because this wouldn't work otherwise. Um, so women need to feel close to a man to feel like they want to have intercourse.
Yeah.
Do men feel close? Is it the opposite? Do men feel closer? Because I'm convinced so many things are opposites. I don't know if this one is. Do men feel closer to their wife when they are having more sex with her?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, it's been my personal experience. I think that's true of the majority of guys I worked with. Yeah, there's Gary Chapman. I think you had him on, right? Gary Chapman, the
Yeah.
five love languages. A lot of guys will say their primary love language is physical touch. Um, and I think that's accurate. I think it's accurate inside of a romantic marriage, long-term relationship. Um, and I don't know. I don't know if that's just because how we're raised. I think. Tell me if this was true for you, but for me, it was kind of like the way you judged where you were in a relationship with a girl is how physical it was. Like
Yeah.
that.
What
That's
base you
like
got to?
exactly, exactly. Like that's the main way that we as guys kind of say, okay, like, yeah, this is how far my relationship has progressed. Um, versus like, oh, like you're not going to go to your buddies and be like, oh, like, guess what we talked about last night? Like I shared
You
with
really
her.
opened up and
Yeah,
shared.
right. Yeah, right. You're never going to say that. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's, I think part of that is like a biological thing where we just, and look, like when you have sex, there is an oxytocin release in your brain that connects you to the person you're having sex with. That happens and it's real. Um, I think for me, and I think this is probably true for a lot of guys, it's kind of like you can't fake that, right? Like if you kiss someone, like their body's there, like you can't fake that. That's real. Like that's a real physical connection. And so I think as guys, we get a lot of comfort from that. Like, yeah, this is someone that's here for me physically, and that physical closeness then kind of translates to us to emotional closeness. Um, so yeah, I think that's true. I think how are men and women different? Again, it's kind of like that, like, and even physically, right? She has to open her body up to us, right? Where we don't really need to open up necessarily to have sex, like physically, right? But the woman does need to. And so for her to open up, she needs to feel safe. She needs to feel protected. She needs to feel like if I open up to you, you're not going to hurt me, right? Physically or emotionally. And so the way to her heart really is to help her feel safe with you. That this is a guy that's going to protect me, not just physically, but also my heart, right? He's going to treat me well. He's going to listen to me. He's going to treat my kids well. Um, he's going to value what I have to say. And then her heart opens up a little more and a little more and a little more. And as her heart opens, her body also opens.
Yeah, the just the act of sex. A man's organs are on the outside. Sex has
Right.
less consequences for the reasons you said. A guy doesn't
Yep.
get pregnant. A woman does, so she has to carry on that responsibility for the rest of her life. Definitely for
Right.
9 months at one level,
At
and
least. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
rest of her life at another level. But yeah, it's very external for men. Nothing is going in our body, right? Just that alone
Right.
is another one. So yeah, some
Yep.
major differences there. So are men today? I know the guys who work with you are probably having improvements and having more intimacy and more sex, and that's why they work with you. That's why you keep growing your podcast, your book, all of that. But are men today in general having less, more, or the same amount of sex as, let's call it, 50 years ago? Do you happen to know? You have an idea?
I don't know the answer to that. I would guess, if I had to guess, I'd probably say less. The reason why is I think 50 years ago, a woman looked at it as her duty to have sex, right? Okay, yeah, like I'm married, I guess that's my wifely duty, and I just have to do it. Whereas now, kind of the cultural thing is, like my body, my choice, and like, um, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just, um, because look, like having duty sex all the time, like, yeah, it's good for the guy. Is it good for the woman? Not if she feels like she doesn't really want to and she's doing it, right? Um, but kind of to your point, like in maybe a Latin culture or a Eastern European culture, if the woman can see that as, no, like this, like I love my man, this is something I want to do for him. Maybe it's I'm not totally in the mood that day, but it's cool. Like I'm okay with it. I think that's like the equivalent of me washing this cup out, right? Like, yeah, is it my favorite thing to do? Not really, but like, do I do it because it's important to her? Yeah. And so that's kind of the equivalent.
So
But
what's But what's getting in the way of intimacy? What are the main things that you see that where you go, yep, another one of these every time you
Yeah.
talk to a guy?
Yeah. So I think it's really it's the misunderstanding of kind of like what we're talking about, like what helps a woman feel open to sex, right? Because a lot of guys will think, oh, I'm providing, I'm taking care of the kids, and so that should open her up, but it doesn't, right? And so guys get frustrated, and that frustration then even drives the wife further away because you're like, no, like I'm doing everything I'm supposed to, and she's like, no, you're not. You're like, but I am, right? And now you're just like
Hmm.
bashing heads and losing intimacy. These are the guys I work with, right? Which is like the high achieving guys who are like, check, 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 check. Okay, you should want to have sex with me now.
Yep.
Um, but the check boxes are just they're different, right? The actual check boxes are, um, listening, valuing, understanding, keeping her safe, doing those little things for her that matter, speaking her. Uh, Speaking in a love language that she uh, responds to. And so when they make that shift, then yeah, like it opens up more. Um, but yeah, I think it's mainly that. I think it's a misunderstanding where guys are still carrying that like 50 years ago mindset of like, well, wait a second, like this isn't fair. Like I'm providing, I'm a good dad, like I'm trying to do nice things for you, like that should be enough, you know. And then the wife's still distant, and they're like screw this, like I'm just gonna go watch porn, I'm gonna have an affair, or feel super stuck in their marriage. Um, but yeah, they just have to update. I think I think it's a hard thing for men to kind of like because 50 years ago, right, it was kind of easy. Like if I'm doing those things, that's it. Like I have sex with my wife every day, I have sex whenever I want, right? Where now, we're kind of called to a higher standard and a higher standard of emotional intelligence and skill and communication intelligence and skill, um, which I think is a good thing, right? Because it helps us grow as men.
Sure. You said the word listen. My wife recently, I heard her say this, and now I've heard her say it more than once describing me. She'll say, when we've done calls where we're both on a webinar or something, and someone will ask, and she says, well, I have to say, Joel's a really good listener. He listens to me every time I talk to
Mhm.
him. I listen because I really am a curious person. I
Yeah,
love to learn and I want to hear. And if my wife wants to tell me about her day, granted, part of it's because I want to fix the parts that didn't work because I'm a
sure.
fixer, but I am intent. I'm really, yep. Oh, really? And and what happened? And so I want to hear it. Man, that's kind of a superpower. Is that one of those pillars to, I mean, does
Absolutely.
that helps?
Yeah. I think it's one of the biggest ones, and I think it's one that a lot of the guys miss, right? Um, their wife will share, and you know they are either distracted or sometimes do like jump too fast to try to fix the problem,
Yep.
versus kind of hearing her heart. um, a useful question I find there is like, hey, do you want me to just hear this, or do you want some ideas, right? I find that really helpful because a lot of times she doesn't really want ideas, she just wants to know you're there. And that's again, like, what's the difference between men and women? Like, I won't tell you my problem unless I want your ideas, usually, right?
Yep.
Um, but a woman will tell you her problem just because it like feels good to like release that and kind of know someone's there with her, and just for you to say, "Oh, I'm sorry," like that's hard.
That has to
Um,
be a feminine thing, right?
yeah, totally.
It's like,
Um,
I don't get
have
it.
you,
That I don't get.
yeah, have you seen the video? It's not about the nail.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like that, right?
This is the
It's
perfect
like,
video. If you guys
yeah,
haven't seen it, go on YouTube and look up. It's not about the nail. Even my wife was like in tears, crying, laughing about that one. In fact, in her 31 day book for women, it's called "It's My Turn." One of the days of the challenge for the women, it's called "It's Not." I think it's called "It's Not About the Nail."
yeah,
And she asked them to go see that video and then say, the guy's not a mind reader. You gotta understand, so whatever. I don't remember all the details of that one, but yeah,
yeah.
it's not about the nail. Women feel good telling you their problems without trying to fix them.
Yeah, yeah, and the way I've learned to think about this is the way we teach about like emotions in the program is breathe, name, feel, release, right? And so, like, we need to find ways to release our emotions in a healthy way. A lot of us guys, we haven't learned that. We either kind of, for anger example, we let it like build up until we explode out, right? But there's healthier ways to release that. Go exercise, go punch something. I like to throw a medicine ball. That's what I do to release anger. Um, but for women, a lot of times that release is saying it, right? And it's a good release for men too, actually. Just tell someone, yeah, like this is bothering me, and just to have someone hear it, it is valuable. Um, but for women, how are men and women different? Like, yeah, it seems to be even more useful for them to release it that way. So you're kind of like, if you're on the other side hearing it, you're like, oh man, yeah, that's hard. You kind of feel like you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Um, but really you did. Like you helped a ton just by being there, letting her release it. And she's gonna feel like so much closer to you after that, just for you being there and available for her to release some of that emotion.
So that's a
Uh,
trick right now that men can start today. They hear this interview with
100%.
you and they could start taking a more active role in listening and not responding right away. What else? What other tips and habits could guys start forming today? Sure, they could read your book, Strong Men, Strong Marriages. They can go on your podcast. They can join your community. And I recommend that. But today, right now, what can
Yeah.
they start doing?
Yeah. So the ones that I've been working on lately that I feel like are something fast that'll make a big difference. So that one for sure, I like listening, but there's something that from this book, This Is How Your Marriage Ends, something called the invalidation triple threat. So if you will watch for this, if you're experiencing like a roommate-ish or like just disconnection, it's not there, this is probably happening. Okay. So what it looks like is, and I'm going to use a toilet seat example. Okay. This was happening in my marriage. So um like my wife was like, come on man, can you just put the toilet seat down at night, right? And so what guys will do is something called the invalidation triple threat. So they'll say what you think is wrong, what you feel is wrong, and I am right. Okay. So what that looked like for us would be like, well, look, like this shouldn't matter to you. This shouldn't be a big deal. Okay. So you're wrong thinking the toilet's is a big deal. You're wrong feeling upset by it, right? And I'd be like, well, you should just put the toilet seat down by yourself. Like be responsible for yourself. You can take 2 seconds and do that. Look at everything else I do for you, right? I'm paying for this house. Like you can at least put the toilet seat down. So, and then justifying myself. This is why I'm right and you're wrong. Okay. And so if you will just watch for that, okay, and just freaking stop doing it. Like just that will make a really big difference right away. So just watch yourself. When she says something, do you find yourself, and maybe you're not even saying it, but you're thinking it, this is dumb, right? This shouldn't be a big deal to you, right? And if you're saying it, that's worse. But if you're thinking it, it's coming across, right? Whether you're saying it or not. So just watch for that. And then shift that into, okay, like you said, you know, trying to understand like why is that important to her. So like the toilet seat, instead of being like, oh, that's dumb, just being like, I don't really understand why this is so important to you. Like, can you tell me? Can you explain to me like why is this so important to you? And then like hear her heart, like that will shift things immediately. So yeah, for like something to start doing today, catch yourself if you ever hear yourself thinking or saying like that's dumb or that's not a big deal. Start shifting that into understanding why it's a big deal, right?
Yeah, it's a
Just
good
like,
start.
yeah, just kind of like being curious and, um, yeah, trying to hear her heart.
I
Because
gotta
in,
share. I gotta share my experience with the toilet seat. I haven't had that argument in probably 20 years, and here's why. And sure, I'll take on the jokes about, oh, you're a sissy, but at home, I realize that I don't want to stand to sit. There's a reason. Sometimes you miss, and then you got to clean it, and I think
yeah,
that's disgusting. And then we have 4 kids, and as they were little and growing up and being potty trained, they would make a mess standing up.
yeah,
And then you're like, this is gross. There's pee. Now every time I have to clean it, I went, you know what? We're teaching our son that when he's home, just at home in his own bathroom, he sits down to go pee.
yeah,
And we taught him that. And I haven't had my toilet seat up except for when the cleaning lady comes and cleans the toilet because it's so much more comfortable at your own home. I wouldn't do it anywhere else. That's weird. But in the middle of the night, as we get older, I get up and pee a bunch of times.
Yeah.
It is more convenient
Yeah.
that the seat is down. So I
Right.
totally understand. I think that's helped me become a better husband, just because I don't want to clean up my kids' pee when they were little.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, great point. I have started to do that too. Um, but yeah, but I think kind of to that point too, where and just like you just said, and I kind of think this too, and I imagine this is true of men, like we have these sort of stereotypes in our mind that are not really even true, but we've kind of started to believe them like, oh, if you sit down to pee, like you're not a man, like it's just not true. Like there's no truth to that. But we get when we start believing it, then we're kind of stuck, right? And now you turn something into a fight that doesn't have to be, right? Like your wife's like, "Hey, can you put the toilet seat down?" And you're like, "Well, I'm a man. I'm not gonna, like I'm gonna stand up, and I don't care about putting the toilet seat down." But and in your mind, you're like, "I'm being strong," right? But
Mm.
what's really happening is you are shutting down your wife's heart, right? She's closing her
Mm.
heart to you. She's closing her body to you when you come at her like that, right? Versus real strength is being able to hear her, listen, show her she's important, right? Um, are there times where you are going to need to like stand up to her too and say like, hey, that's not appropriate, or like, hey, like I believe differently and that's important to me. I need to take a stand here. Yes, right. But for stuff like this, like, it's not, it's just, it's wrong thinking, right? It's
Yeah,
wrong
it's a dumb
thinking.
argument. And
Yeah.
then you said it, you're closing her down on these stupid things, like cleaning the cup, putting the toilet seat down. So, I personally don't care what people think outside. I, I care about what's going on in here, my mind, my wife,
Yeah.
I don't care about a lot of society's things, an oddball that way, and always have been. However, well, no, in line with that, what do you believe for you? What is the role of a man?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think uh, there's this saying I grew up with, provide, preside, protect. I like that kind of phrasing. So preside meaning kind of like be the leader in your home. Not that you lord over your wife or don't care what she says, right? But you're kind of taking the lead. You're taking the initiative, right? Um, that's strength, so that's provide financially for your family, but also like emotionally, being there for them, like we just talked about today, listening, being someone that people can talk to, especially your wife. That's providing, financially, emotionally, that kind of thing. And then protect your family physically, um, but also again, like emotionally, making sure you're not hurting your wife or your kids with outbursts of anger or with um, this invalidation triple threat. Like if you're because look, a lot of high achieving guys are like this, and I used to be like this. I still fall into this. Is like just telling people they're wrong, right? That's stupid. Like you shouldn't think that way. You shouldn't feel that way. Because in some ways it helps us, like in work and things, we actually do need to reject bad ideas so that we can pursue good ones. But at home, like you need to value what people say. And a lot of times, especially in relationships, like there's not even really one that is so much better than the other. So just hearing someone's viewpoint and values, it's going to help you, right? It's going to expand your horizons. So yeah, preside, provide, protect. I think that's what a man's job is.
Yeah, if a woman disagrees with that, it would be good to fake a break-in into the house in the middle of the night and see who she wants to go check on that broken window. Is she going to
Yeah,
do it or are you going to do it?
you're right.
Yeah, I've heard
Right.
comedians say things like, you know, all those years where yes, the man was dominant and in charge and all of this, but as soon as they've gotten the power now with feminism and things that were needed for women to have some equal rights too, yeah, but they haven't thrown away the like women and children first. I'm sure if they're on a sinking boat, they're going to go, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 I go first.
We'll still go first. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So tell us a story about someone you've had big wins with, where maybe they got to you because it was what everyone else would have said, this has to end in divorce. And maybe going through your program, listening to your podcast, reading your book has changed that.
Yeah, that man, great question. So this is what I'm my favorite part of what I do. Just recently, I just got this message yesterday from a guy been in the program 60 days now. Um, so came in, there was infidelity actually on his wife's side, which is really common. And yeah, emotional infidelity, sexual infidelity, like it happens a lot. And a lot of people will take that viewpoint, like, well, you should just throw that woman away, right? Kick her to the curb. But look, you got kids, and like if you can, a lot of guys that I work with, they want to keep it together, even if there has been infidelity. Um, so that happened, and his wife was kind of on the fence, like, I don't really know if I want to stick in the marriage. I'm not sure. I've never talked to this woman. I've never met her, but the guy comes in, he does the work, right? He's 60 days in. His wife's like, no, like I'm in, like I want to work on this. I want us to work. Like she initiated sex with him. Um, yeah, that was just this week, and like they're on the path now to just having an intimate marriage and a great marriage after something that would break a lot of marriages.
And what
Um,
led to that infidelity?
yeah, great question.
Because
So,
what? Because the most important thing is what could that guy do? What could
yep,
he have done? What could other
exactly.
guys do to avoid that?
Exactly. So again, to me, the way marriages break down is those things. Trust breaks first, right? And it can be something big, but usually it's not. Usually it's these small things. Like for him, it was like, oh, I'll be home at this time. Then he wasn't, and he wasn't, and he wasn't. Or
Mm.
like there's kind of this there's this implied promise that like I'm going to put you first in my life when you get married, where he would not really do that. He'd go spend time with his friends or his dad instead of with his wife, right? So eventually she started feeling unimportant, unimportant. He's not really listening. All of a sudden, someone starts paying attention to her, right? And that feels good. Like we all want someone that pays attention to us. And so, then there was some connection there. With women, typically it's going to start more emotional and then can get physical. And that was the case here. So, yeah, that's what happened. And so a lot of it is, yeah, just the small things add up. And kind of the same thing, this invalidation triple threat happened over and over. She was telling him, hey, like, please make me more important. And he was like, well, you are important. Look, I'm out here. I'm doing this work because you are important to me. But she's like, that's not connecting, dude. Like, I need you to do these things to show I'm important. And he just told her he was wrong. She was wrong over and over. And eventually she
Wow.
got sick of that.
Yeah. And another guy gave her a look and attention
Right.
and listened to her. Maybe a year ago or so, and I got into doing heavily this men's stuff, and I sold my company, and so I focus on this now. My wife said, you sometimes don't know the problems of marriage and men and women because we've worked so much that we don't have these problems, right? We're absolute best friends. I wouldn't change a thing about our marriage or her. And she says, so why don't you join some groups so you can start seeing what's out there? And I joined these Facebook groups, and man, we're in trouble. This society is a mess.
Yeah.
Every time that someone would say something like, well, my wife's this and that, every guy would jump on the bash the woman side and
Yeah.
never question, like, dude, have you paid attention to her? Have you treated her well? Have you?
Yeah.
Nope. And they all say the same thing. I provide, and now she's this.
Yeah. Yeah. See, and that's the fallacy, right? That's what we're in this mindset, this like 50 years ago mindset, right? Of, well, if I'm providing, that should be enough. But it just isn't. Like if you want her to open her heart and her body to you, that won't cut it anymore. It never really did. It's just women were kind of trapped financially. They couldn't work. So they just
Um,
had to deal with it, right? But now they don't have to deal with it. And so now if you want your wife to open up to you, you have to have these skills. You have to treat her well. You have to listen well if you want an intimate marriage. If you don't care, if you want a roommate-ish marriage, then don't learn any of this,
yeah,
right?
just
Uh,
they wouldn't be watching us. They
yeah,
wouldn't make it this far. We're about an hour in. They wouldn't have made it here.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
the other point I want to make about that real quick too is you're totally right, and that's why I don't like these Facebook groups. Like they don't want to take responsibility; they just want to blame the wife instead of like. But so the first marriage divorce rate is about 40%. So if it was a like wrong person problem, second marriage divorce rate should be better, but it's not. It's 60%. Third marriage, 70%. What does that tell you? What it tells you is this guy that keeps getting remarried, he's the problem, but he doesn't think he is, right? He thinks it's the woman's problem. And so he's just going to keep looking for the right woman instead of building the skills to create a great marriage.
And maybe hopefully after a couple of those, they start building the right, and then they go, well, I got the right woman. They don't realize it's, you did the work and you're getting better.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So if guys want to connect with you, the website is strongmen, plural, strongmen.io. And the podcast, you can look it up wherever podcasts are. Strong Men, Strong Marriages, which is also the name of the book. And your YouTube is Mike Frazier, MD. Did I get all that?
That is correct. Yeah.
Cool. So I know someone who's in my men's group in the Brotherhood who has, listens to your podcast. He's the one that connected us,
Mhm.
and so I'm super grateful to him for doing that and putting you in my life. I hope that guys will look at that. Look at the podcast, look at your program, and talk to you about connecting, so they could be a little more intentional. And there is a 90-day program, right?
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, it's we look at how do you build these strengths and skills? How do you build spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, and sexual strength? Like it's there's this phrase out there, you need to work on yourself, right? But no one knows what that means, but what this program is, it's like a very clear way to work on yourself. In other words, how do I build spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, sexual strength? How do I build communication and intimacy skills? So you're going to have a very clear curriculum and exercise that you do every day to do that and build those strengths and skills.
Man, can't ask for more. It's all lined up and in a program that works, obviously. So if you're going through that, look at this. What we've mentioned here, we'll have links on here also. So guys, take a look. Dr. Mike Frazier, thank you very much. Very insightful.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, thanks, Joel.
Thanks.